Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Hey folks, welcome back to the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. Today we're hiking into the hollows of southern West Virginia to cover one of the largest labor uprisings in United States history, the 1921 Battle of Blair Mountain.
This is the dramatic climax of the West Virginia mine wars. Thousands of Union coal miners, red bandanas around their necks, squaring off against an army of company-backed deputies and hired guns along a rugged mountain ridgeline.
Think trench lines on forested slopes, homemade bombs dropped from private planes, and more than 1 million rounds fired. And somehow most people never heard about it in school.
By the end, you'll know why a bandana became a symbol, how treason trials ended up in the same courthouse where John Brown faced justice, and why this battle still echoes in labor debates today.
As always, our episodes are evergreen, relevant whenever you hit play, and powered by the latest AI architecture for up-to-date, efficient research and production. Also, stay tuned after the episode for the original song, When the Mountain Answered Back. All right, boots laced?
Let's climb. Southern West Virginia in the 1910s and early 1920s was a boom region strapped to a single engine, coal. Company towns spilled down narrow hollers, rows of shotgun houses, a tipple at the creek, and the company store on the bend. Most miners were paid in scrip, metal tokens, or paper notes, redeemable only at that store.
Imagine payday, where your boss hands you monopoly money and then owns the only grocery in town. Prices aren't exactly competitive when there's one cashier and she reports to the mine superintendent.
The work was brutal and dangerous. Roof falls, explosions, black damp. Safety gear was minimal, days were long, and if you got hurt, you were often out of luck. Meanwhile, the company controlled your house, the store, sometimes even the church and school. Organizing risked not just your job, but your roof.
Enter the United Mine Workers of America, UMWA, pushing for union recognition, an 8-hour day, fair pay in U.S. currency, the right to talk to a checkweighman, safer conditions. Coal operators fought back with yellow dog contracts and armed guards, especially the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency, men with rifles and eviction papers.
And this conflict didn't pop out of nowhere. A decade earlier, the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strikes of 1912, 1913 turned the Kanawha Valley into a low-level war zone, tent colonies, armored bull moose trains, and periods of martial law. The mine wars were a long arc, not a one-off.
Zoom out to the wider United States. World War I ends in 1918. Coal demand had boomed during the war, then seesawed. In 1919, you've got inflation punching paychecks in the face, a nationwide strike wave, the Great Steel Strike, a huge coal strike led by the UMWA, and the first Red Scare. Radicals and even mainstream unionists are painted as Bolsheviks with lunch pails.
Add the 1918 and 1919 influenza pandemic's fresh grief, prohibitions starting in 1920, women winning the vote that same year, and the start of a sharp recession in 1920 and 1921. Warren G. Harding takes office in March 1921, promising a return to normalcy, which in practice often meant a colder climate for labor militancy.
Immigration is tightening. The Emergency Quota Act arrives in 1921. Jim Crow is entrenched in the South, and the Great Migration is reshaping the workforce. In the coal fields, Black miners, recent European immigrants, and native-born Appalachians are working shoulder to shoulder, sometimes divided by company tactics, sometimes unified by danger and debt.
Inside the UMW, leadership is turning over to a new generation. John L. Lewis becomes president in 1920. While on the ground in West Virginia, District 17's Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney press hard to unionize the southern counties. Another force, ageless and fierce, Mother Jones, warning that rage without a plan could get people killed.
The flashpoint before Blair is Mattawan, May 1920. Baldwin-Felts agents roll into town to evict Union families. Police Chief Sid Hatfield, sympathetic to miners, confronts them. A shootout erupts on the main street. Several agents die, including a Baldwin-Felts leader. Hatfield becomes a folk hero with a badge and a wide-brim hat.
But on August 1st, 1921, Hatfield and his deputy Ed Chambers are ambushed and killed on the courthouse steps in Welch. To miners, it looks like revenge, dressed up as law. Word spreads along the rail lines and ridges. If the courts won't protect us, maybe a march will.
Meanwhile, in Logan County, Sheriff Don Chafin, politically wired to coal operators, builds a fortified wall against union organizers. He's got deputies, state police, money, and terrain on his side. He also has a runway and friendly pilots, a 1921 version of Don't Even Try It.
So you've got national headwinds, recession, Red Scare politics, a federal government leaning quiet on labor, meeting local powder kegs, scrip, evictions, armed guards, and a sheriff who intends to keep his county union free. The miners' answer is simple, visible, and risky. Gather by the thousands and walk.
And to know who's with you in the tangled woods, tie on a red bandana. It's practical, it's symbolic, and it gives a name, rednecks, that miners reclaim as a badge of solidarity.
That's the world at the trailhead of Blair Mountain. A nation craving normal, a region trapped in company control, and a workforce deciding whether rights will come by petition or by presence.
Picture this, late August 1921. The heat sits heavy over the Kanawha, and along the riverbank at Marmet, thousands of miners shoulder rifles and bedrolls. Some wear army surplus from the last war, some carry squirrel guns from the mantel. Most have a red bandana at the throat so they can tell friend from foe in the timber. They're not a mob, they're a moving town. Cooks, medics, runners, and a whole lot of men who've decided the road itself is their petition.
The plan, such as anyone could agree on it, was to head south, through Boone County toward the Logan line, break Sheriff Don Chafin's blockade, and open the mines to union organizers. But even the start was messy. UMW leaders Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney, worried this could spin into a bloodbath, tried to slow things down.
And for a moment, it worked. There was a truce in the making, word that the governor might consider releasing jailed miners and pulling deputies back. Some men even started drifting home. Then a rumor ripped through camp. Anti-union forces had killed miners at Sharples. Whether garbled or not, it hit like lightning. Feet turned south again.
Geography matters. From Marmet, columns moved up Lenz Creek and along old logging and wagon roads that threaded the ridges. The target was the narrow spine of Spruce Fork Ridge, the high ground that includes Blair Mountain, because whoever owned those saddles owned the county line.
Think about the logistics for a second. Food was whatever locals could spare and what runners could buy and haul. Cornbread, beans, coffee, jerky. Ammunition came in by car, mule, and backpack. Communication? No radios. Just runners, hand-scribbled notes, and pre-arranged signals. A few veterans used trench whistles from France to organize rushes and pullbacks.
And the composition. This wasn't one kind of miner. You had black miners, immigrants from southern and eastern Europe, and white Appalachian locals, often working side by side. The shared language was danger and debt. World War I vets taught skirmish lines and fire discipline. Hunters knew where a ridge pinches into a choke point and how sound hops across a hollow.
On the other side, Sheriff Chafin had an edge, the ridge itself. He built a lattice of positions, breastworks and foxholes at the gaps, and sighted machine guns down logging cuts and along roads that funneled attackers. He had deputies, state police, mine guards, and friendly volunteers. He also had access to small private aircraft from local fields, an intimidation tool, and soon, a weapon.
By August 29th through 30th, the lead elements of the marchers, now in loose companies under the emerging leadership of Bill Blizzard, were feeling out the line. Blizzard's talent was turning a mass into a map. He split men into sections, posted pickets on the spurs, and pushed scouts onto the shoulders of the ridge to probe for weak spots.
First contact came as scattered skirmishes near the approaches, Jeffrey, Sharples, and the hollows feeding toward Blair. The miners pressed upslope in small teams, leapfrogging from log to rock. The defenders waited until they could see shapes in the leaf litter and then opened with interlocking bursts. The hills turned those bursts into thunder.
Supply lines had to snake under fire. Cars with white cloths tied to their mirrors crept along back roads to drop off crates of 30-30 and 30-06, then reversed with wounded laid out across the seats. Local women cooked for both sides, depending on who was nearest and who was hungry.
And overhead, the buzz. Private pilots made passes along the ridge. A few small, improvised bombs, nails, gas charges, were dropped on suspected concentrations of miners. Most did little damage, some didn't detonate. But try keeping your nerve when a canvas and wood biplane is snarling above the treetops and something clatters through the canopy.
Night didn't stop much, just changed the shape of fear. Campfires were hooded, scouts crawled, runners memorized turns by tree silhouettes. Both sides tried to cut the other's ears, literally the lines of communication, by pulling down phone wires and sending decoys to feed false rumors.
And the rumors mattered. Every hour brought a new ripple. Reinforcements coming from Mingo, deputies massing at Logan, federal troops on the way, or not coming at all. Morale rose and fell with the stories as much as with the gunfire.
By August 31st, the marchers were pressing hard at several gaps, hoping to outflank the main positions around Blair. The ridge fought for the defenders, steep, slick, and unforgiving. Still, bit by bit, the miners found games of inches, a fold in the ground here, a sapling screen there, and pushed firing lines closer.
Here's the paradox of the march. It was a statement, thousands moving together because talk had failed. But once you reach a ridgeline laced with machine guns, a statement becomes a siege. The miners were brave, numerous, and motivated. The defenders were dug in, elevated, and supplied. Something had to give, or someone else had to step in.
Calls went out from Charleston to Washington. West Virginia's governor pleaded for federal help. Meanwhile, on the ridge, ammunition belts grew lighter, and men tried to sleep against tree roots, while a stranger's breathing steadied them through the dark.
Dawn, September 1st. New pushes, new flanking attempts. The ridge kept answering with the same hard sentence. And then, the sound that would change the shape of the fight. The steady thrum of U.S. Army aircraft scouting overhead, the first sign that federal troops were moving into the hills.
The march had reached the mountain. The next act would decide how, and whether, it came back down. August 31st into September 1st, 1921. The ridges above Spruce Fork become a broken necklace of firefights. Miners edge forward in small squads, testing every fold of ground. Defenders answer from dug-in positions with overlapping fields of fire.
Picture the map as a spine with ribs. The spine is Blair Mountain. The ribs are those steep spurs. The miners try to walk the ribs, sliding along the flanks to slip past machine guns covering the roads. If you move directly up a logging cut, you're a silhouette. If you sidehill through Laurel, you might live to try the next draw.
Ammunition discipline becomes a survival tactic. Veterans call for controlled volleys, not panic fire. Hunters remind everyone to shoot for shadows at the base of trees, not the branches, because that's where a man actually is.
On the defender side, Sheriff Don Chaffin's men rotate crews through trenches to keep barrels cool, pass ammo belts hand to hand, and use runners between posts because phone lines keep getting cut. They've also set up simple range markers, painted stones, notches in a log, to recalibrate aim after each burst.
Casualties accrue in singles and pairs, an unlucky rush, a ricochet off shale. Numbers are fuzzy then and now. The terrain swallows bodies into folds of earth and oak roots. Stretcher teams crawl under fire, wounded ride out in the back seats of commandeered cars.
And then politics arrives with boots on. West Virginia's governor has been pleading for federal help. In Washington, the fear isn't only bloodshed, it's the optics of open warfare between citizens and a local machine. Orders move. Regular Army units mobilize under General Henry Bandholtz.
September 2nd, Army aircraft scout the ridges. No bombs, just eyes. Word ripples through both lines. The U.S. Army is coming up the valleys.
This matters because many miners are veterans. They'll fight deputies and mine guards. They will not, as a rule, fight the Army. Leaders on both sides know it. Messages start to circulate. When the Army arrives, don't fire.
September 3rd. Federal infantry and machine gun companies enter the area. They secure key crossings and road junctions, then fan toward the contested ridge. Officers move deliberately, showing presence without picking a side. It's policing by posture.
The effect is immediate. Firing sags where khaki appears. Some miners tie white cloths to rifle barrels as a signal. Others disengage by inches, one squad at a time, sliding back down the spurs to rally points in the hollows.
Still, pockets of shooting linger, places where word hasn't traveled, or where men don't trust that the other side will honor a pause. The Army sends patrols up with hands open, weapons slung, to talk before they command.
By September 4th, coordinated disarmament begins. Collection points pop up along roads and at small towns in the valleys. Rifles, shotguns, a few captured automatics, stacked in pyramids, logged in notebooks. Some men hand over a weapon and keep a pocket full of shells as a last scrap of control.
The ridge quiets into a human churn, men looking for friends, for rides home, for news of who made it out. The army escorts wounded of both sides. A few officers scrawl IOUs for confiscated guns, others don't. Memory will long debate which was which.
What broke the fight wasn't a decisive flank or a heroic charge. It was legitimacy. The army's arrival gave both sides a ladder down. Miners could stop without feeling they'd quit. Defenders could yield the ridgeline without feeling they'd lost it.
But a calm ridge is not a settled story. As the smoke thins, state officials and prosecutors start counting names. Indictments loom, from murder to treason against the state. The march has ended. The legal war is opening.
So the gunfire fades and the paperwork begins. Arrests, arraignments, bond hearings. The next battlefield is the courthouse, some of them famous ones. And the question shifts from who holds Blair Mountain to what does the law say about what just happened?
When the shooting stopped, the state picked up a new weapon: indictments. Grand juries handed down charges against roughly 1,000 miners and organizers, everything from conspiracy and murder to the marquee allegation, treason against West Virginia. The legal logic was stark. By marching under arms to challenge county authority, the miners had levied war on the state.
Prosecutors aimed high, starting with visible leaders. Bill Blizzard faced treason first. The venue was moved far from the coalfields to tamp down local loyalties, and the courtroom became a referendum on who controlled the meaning of the march, insurrection, or a collective attempt to reach justice when officials wouldn't listen.
Blizzard's defense team did two things well. They questioned the state's chain of proof: who fired, who ordered, who actually meant to overthrow anything, and they reframed intent. Miners were trying to pass through, not pull down the government. Jurors heard weeks of testimony and acquitted him. That verdict set the tone.
Other big names followed, Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney among them. Results were mixed. Some acquittals, some convictions on lesser counts. Many cases quietly dropped when evidence was thin or witnesses contradictory. But even wins drained time, savings, and morale.
The financial hit was brutal. The UMBA poured money into defense funds while operators doubled down on private security, blacklists, and ironclad yellow dog contracts that barred union membership. Court costs, lost wages, and bail put families on a razor's edge.
Politically, the climate didn't help. With a recession biting and a Red Scare hangover still shaping headlines, state officials found it easy to frame the prosecutions as public order. Injunctions multiplied. Organizers found themselves hemmed in by court orders as much as by deputies.
By the mid-1920s, membership across the southern West Virginia fields cratered. Mines that had flirted with recognition backed away. Others purged union men outright. Whatever solidarity the march had built on the ridges now had to survive pay cuts and pink slips at the tipple.
And yet, the story doesn't end in retreat. The national legal landscape shifted in the 1930s. Section 7A of the National Industrial Recovery Act in 1933, followed by the Wagner Act in 1935, opening new doors for organizing. John L. Lewis's UMWA capitalized, rebuilding strength in old strongholds and finally gaining what court battles hadn't delivered a decade earlier: enforceable rights to organize and bargain.
The paradox is hard to miss. In the short run, the trials chilled the movement and punished households that could least afford it. In the long run, the memory of that march, who showed up, who stood fast, who paid, fed the conviction that rights needed federal guarantees, not just local tolerance.
Which raises the last big question of this saga. What should Blair Mountain mean to us now, beyond legal briefs and headcounts?
Let's turn the ridge into a classroom. First lesson: power often hides in structures, not just in personalities. Company towns, scrip, and captive housing created a closed economic loop. The conflict only made sense once workers stepped outside that loop together. If you're evaluating any workplace today, ask what loops exist. Who controls the paycheck, the gate, and the grievance process?
Second lesson: legitimacy beats tactics. On Blair's slopes, neither side lost militarily. The arrival of federal authority provided a face-saving off-ramp. That's a reminder that disputes aren't only about force, but about who the public believes is entitled to act. Movements that invest in credibility, clear goals, disciplined behavior, transparent leadership, tend to gain staying power.
Third, information is a weapon. Rumors moved lines, not just bullets. In any high-stress campaign, labor, political, community, establishing trusted channels and redundancy matters. Who speaks for the movement? How do you correct bad intel quickly? The miners had runners and whistles. We have group chats and feeds, but the problem is the same.
Fourth, coalitions are strategic assets, not slogans. The march drew black miners, recent immigrants, and native-born Appalachians into practical solidarity. That didn't erase prejudice, but it proved that shared material interests can overcome division when leaders keep the focus on concrete wins, hours, pay, safety, rather than abstractions.
Fifth, geography shapes justice. The side with elevation and prepared positions held off a much larger force. Translate that into nonviolent terms. Terrain can be legal frameworks, media ecosystems, or institutional procedures. If you don't understand the ground you're fighting on, numbers alone won't deliver outcomes.
Sixth, lawfare lingers. After the shooting, the courtroom became the battlefield. Even acquittals drained resources and time. Modern organizers should budget for legal defense the way they budget for outreach. Assume it's part of the campaign, not an afterthought.
Seventh, symbolism binds memory. The red bandana did logistical work, friend from foe, and cultural work, identity from anonymity. Effective movements choose symbols that are legible, portable, and durable. If your emblem needs a paragraph to explain, it's probably not doing its job.
Eighth, short-term setbacks concede long-term wins. The trials and blacklists shrank the union locally, but the story of Blair helped build the case for national labor protections in the 1930s. When a campaign falters, capture the narrative, archive the lessons, and convert pain into policy.
Finally, memory requires maintenance. For decades, Blair was a footnote. It took teachers, archivists, and locals to keep the story alive and push for preservation. If a community's history matters to you, support the people who do the unglamorous work, cataloging, teaching, marking trails, funding exhibits, so the next generation inherits more than a rumor.
That's what Blair Mountain teaches. Rights are negotiated across tables, ridges, courtrooms, and classrooms, and each arena demands different skills. Learn the ground, choose your symbols, protect your people, and fight for legitimacy as fiercely as you fight for demands.
To really understand Blair Mountain, you have to listen for the voices that don't show up in affidavits or casualty lists, not the headlines, just people speaking plainly. We've pulled together composite snapshots from testimony, letters, and oral histories to capture the texture of what those days felt like.
Think of these as windows, not to glorify anyone, but to hear the calculations, the doubts, the stubborn hope that kept men and families moving through a very tight corridor of choices.
A miner's note to his wife, left on a kitchen table before dawn. I'll be where the road bends past Len's Creek. If it turns to talk, I'll be home by Sunday. If it turns to work, I'll be longer. Keep the boy out of the store ledger if you can. There's coffee in the tin. Hide it. It's logistics, apology, and promise in 4 sentences.
A black miner explaining why he joined, speaking years later. I knew the company would pay me Saturday and take it back Monday. A bandana, don't care what color I am. The roof can't tell it either. That's solidarity as lived arithmetic.
A local woman describing the marchers passing her porch. They were not loud. They were hungry. I made biscuits till I ran out of flour, and then I made a pot of beans. I fed who came first, and whoever came after had coffee. No speeches, just triage and a clean plate.
A deputy's memory of the ridge. We didn't feel heroic, only stuck. If they came straight up the cut, we could shoot. If they slid in the timber, we listened and guessed. Geography as destiny, in a sentence.
A veteran miner coaching a younger one. You don't shoot at branches. Bark lies. Aim where a man would rest his elbows. Not bravado, just a field lesson passed on the quick.
A marcher, recalling the rumors. Every hour was, they're coming, or they ain't. I learned to wait for the third telling. Influencers existed before the internet. They were called loud men with good posture.
A union organizer after the acquittals. Victory felt like breathing, not like cheering. You breathe, and then you count who needs a lawyer next. That's what legal wins often sound like from the inside.
A school teacher, decades later, trying to teach Blair without a textbook chapter. I wrote the ridge on the board like a spine and asked who holds a body up. The class said, muscles. I said memory. Civic education as repair work.
A miner's widow asked what justice would have looked like: a paycheck in dollars, a roof that doesn't tremble, a man who comes home when the dinner bell rings. Policy metrics translated to a dinner table.
A pilot who flew reconnaissance with federal troops. From the air, the lines were suggestion more than fact. You could see how both sides were trying not to be the ones who fired last. The altitude of perspective changes the story's edges.
A young marcher handing over his rifle when the army arrived. I kept 2 shells in my pocket, not to shoot, just to remember I wasn't empty. Sometimes a souvenir is a boundary you draw around your own dignity.
And a final voice from a hiker on that ridge today. The trees don't tell you who believed what. They only tell you where it was steep, which is its own kind of lesson about humility in the face of other people's hard ground.
None of these lines settles the debate over Blair Mountain. What they do is thicken it, give us enough texture to resist neat morals. When we say the story is evergreen, this is what we mean. The questions inside these voices don't expire. They wait for us to answer them, in our own time, on our own ridges.
There are many historical places people want to visit, and if Blair Mountain is on your list, treat it like a classroom and a memorial rolled into one. Start with homework. Read a short overview of the mine wars, print a topographic map, and note which roads and trails are public. Cell service can be patchy, so plan for offline navigation and tell someone your route.
Dress for a real ridge, not a roadside pull-off. Sturdy boots, long pants, water, and layers. The slopes are steep, footing can be slick after rain, and summer brings heat ticks and dense foliage. Move at a pace that lets you notice the landscape rather than just conquer it.
Respect boundaries. This is a mosaic of public land, private parcels, and working forests. If you're unsure, don't cross a fence or a posted line. Ask permission when in doubt, and remember that residents aren't props in your trip. They're neighbors living with a heavy history.
Practice. Leave no trace. No digging. No metal detecting. No collecting artifacts. Even a rusted can tells a story in place that it can't tell on a shelf. If you spot something that looks significant, photograph it, note the location, and share it with a local historical group rather than pocketing it.
Walk with context. On ridges and saddles, look for terrain features that shape the fight. Narrow choke points, long sightlines along old road cuts, and the dead ground folds that offered cover. You won't see neat trenches everywhere. Time and trees have softened the scars. Let the contour lines do the talking.
Keep noise low and group small when possible. This isn't a place for drones, speakers, or off-trail shortcuts. If you bring kids or students, give them a simple task. Sketch the ridge profile or mark where a path forces you to bunch up. Then ask what that would mean under pressure.
Support the stewards. Local museums, archives, and historical societies are the reason this story is legible today. If you can, budget time and a donation for them. Pick up a map, ask questions, and learn how preservation efforts are progressing. Your curiosity and dollars help keep the site interpreted and protected.
Be a good guest in nearby towns. Use local cafes and groceries, park considerately, and leave your route cleaner than you found it. If someone shares a family story, receive it with gratitude. Memory here is personal.
Finally, build in reflection time. Find a quiet spot, read a primary source excerpt, or just sit with the ridge. Ask yourself what changed because people walked here together, and what still needs changing where you live. That's how a visit becomes more than a hike.
If you treat Blair Mountain as a place to learn, not just to see, you'll carry something home that outweighs souvenirs, perspective, and a responsibility to keep the story alive with care.
If there's one image I'm keeping from Blair Mountain, it isn't the trenches. It's the choice to walk together when walking alone wasn't working. Ordinary people turned private hardship into a public fact, and that changed what could happen next.
And next didn't mean a tidy ending. The ridge didn't surrender its lessons in a day. But after Blair, it was harder to ignore the price of silence and easier to see why dignity at work is never accidental. It's organized, stubborn, and shared.
There's humility in how it ended too. De-escalation wasn't defeat. It was choosing to live for the long fight. Ballots, bargaining, courtrooms, classrooms. Movements need survivors more than perfect finales.
Measure progress in seasons, not headlines. A week can look like a stalemate. A decade can look like momentum. Blair proves memory is a lever. If we keep our hands on it,
Wherever you are, school, shop floor, or city council chamber, carry Blair's checklist. Know your ground, build broad coalitions, earn legitimacy, plan for legal defense, protect your people, and choose symbols that travel.
and carry it with gratitude. This show exists because you listen, share, and keep history alive around your own tables. Seriously, thank you.
If this episode resonated, please take a moment to rate and review the History AI podcast. A 5-star review really helps us grow and reach more curious minds.
Tap follow or subscribe so new episodes land right in your feed. And remember, all our episodes are evergreen, built to hold up whenever you press play.
Got a topic you want us to tackle? Send suggestions via our social channels. We read everything. And yes, the new merch just dropped. Grab a tee inspired by today's story using the link in the show notes.
We make this show with the latest AI architecture to keep it sharp and efficient, but the heart is human. The questions we ask, the voices we feature, and the care we take with the past.
Thanks for spending your time with us and for sharing the episode with a friend who'd love it.
For the History AI podcast, I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. Stay curious, be kind, and we'll see you next time.
Before the sun, cold dust still on their hands, company script in their pockets, blood in the seams of the land, kids coughing in the morning air, shacks nail tight with fear. The mine owns the road, the store, the law, and the future cost a year. They said sign your name or starve, said this is just the way it is. But a whisper ran through the camps that night, like a fuse in the dark being lit. So we marched with red bandanas on up the spine of Blair Mountain, thousands of boots on borrowed ground with nothing left to lose or counted. They had planes and badges and loaded guns, we had songs and a reason to stand. And the mountain shook when the workers sang, this land won't bury us again. Sheriffs paid by coal barons, courts that never heard outside, union cars burned in the open air, men beaten just for trying. Mothers prayed over empty plates, fathers learned to bite their tongue, but hunger has a louder voice than any boss with a gun. They called us criminals, mobs and thugs, said the law was carved in stone, but the law didn't cough in the company house or die in a shaft alone. So we marched with red bandanas on up the spine of Blair Mountain. Old rifles passed from hand to hand like stories worth accounting. They had headlines, wires, and federal words. We had coal black lungs and pride, and the mountain heard every working man who refused to lay down and die. They dropped bombs from the sky that day on American soil, no less, just to teach the poor a simple truth: know your place, know your mess. But you can't bomb a promise, and you can't jail a need. Every rock remembers every footstep, every scar remembers the greed. This wasn't about money, it wasn't about flags, it was about who gets to breathe and who gets buried under contracts and slaves. They sent the army in at last, metal shining clean to end a war no history book likes to keep between. Some went home, some went quiet, some never came back, but the mountain still hums that chorus low through every Union track. Yeah, we marched with red bandanas on up the spine of Blair Mountain. We didn't win the fight that day, but we cracked the damn foundation. You can break a strike, you can jail a man, you can lie and repeat father just changed names and the mountain still remembers mine. So if you hear boots in the gravel or a song you can't outrun, that's Blair Mountain breathing long after the guns are done.